فقال النبي ثانيا يا لي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني برسالة نزيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيعتنا ومحبينا وفيه مهموم الله وفرج الله همه ولا مغموم إلا وكشف الله غمه ولا طالب حاجة إلا وقضى الله حاجته. فقال علي نزم والله فزنا وسعيدنا كذلك شيعتنا فازوا وسعدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Let's recite one Surah Fatiha for all the Marooneen. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
صلوات. پادے حسین کس نے کہا میں یتیم ہوں، بادے حسین کس نے کہا میں یتیم ہوں، مقتل سے آ رہی ہے صدا میں یتیم ہوں، باد حسین کس نے کہا میں یتیم ہوں، میں اپنے آنسوں سے بجھا لوں گی اپنی پیاس، دریا سے لوٹ آؤ چچا میں یتیم ہوں، باد حسین کس نے کہا میں یتیم ہوں، رو کر کہا سکینہ نے لاش حسین پر، اب جا کے یقین ہوا میں یتیم ہوں، باد حسین کس نے کہا میں یتیم ہوں، سر رکھ دیا سکینہ نے زینب کی گود میں، رکھنا پھوپھی خیال میرا میں یتیم ہوں، باد حسین کس نے کہا میں یتیم ہوں. صلوات. صلوات. اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں، اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں، کیسا ہے یہ چراغاں دل ڈوبے جا رہے ہیں، کیا شام آ گیا ہے، اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں، ہونے لگی اذانیں، کیسے سروں کو ڈھانپے، بازو بندھے ہوئے ہیں، خون رو رہی ہیں آنکھیں، آنکھوں کے خون سے رستے خون میں نہا رہے ہیں، کیا شام آ گیا ہے، اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں، نیزوں پہ جتنے سر ہیں، ایک سر ہے ان میں ایسا، آنکھیں ہیں بند اس کی اور خاک پر ہے گرتا، عباس کا یہ سر ہے، تیور بتا رہے ہیں، کیا شام آ گیا ہے، اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں، ہے اتنا چلے ہیں پیدل، کانٹوں پہ سارے قیدی، تھک جاتی چلتے چلتے، چلتی اگر زمین بھی، پیروں کے آبلے بھی آنسو بہا رہے ہیں، کیا شام آ گیا ہے، اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں، لوگ کس طرح کے ہم سے دعا کرائیں، اے قیدیو دعا دو یہ دن نہ ہم پہ آئیں، لے کر دعائیں ہم سے دل بھی دکھا رہے ہیں، کیا شام آ گیا ہے، اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں، ماؤں کی گودیوں سے لپٹے ہوئے ہیں بچے، ہیں ہاتھ رسیوں میں، ماؤں سے ایسے جھکڑے، بچے جو گر رہے ہیں وہ مرتے جا رہے ہیں، کیا شام آ گیا ہے، اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں، صلوات۔
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. یاری برائے خوشنودی امام زمانہ بلند تر صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. یوں سکینہ نے پکارا اے میرے بابا حسین. یوں سکینہ نے پکارا اے میرے بابا حسین. اب نہیں کوئی ہمارا اے میرے بابا حسین. شمر بالی کھینچتا ہے کان سے آ جائیے. شمر بالی کھینچتا ہے کان سے آ جائیے. آئیے اب تو خدا را اے میرے بابا حسین. یوں سکینہ نے پکارا اے میرے بابا حسین. رات ہوتی ہے برستی اس سر پر دیکھیے. رات ہوتی ہے برستی اس سر پر دیکھیے. ہے پھٹا کرتا ہمارا اے میرے بابا حسین. ہے پھٹا کرتا ہمارا اے میرے بابا حسین. جلے گئے خیمے لٹے ہم چادریں چھینی گئی. جلے گئے خیمے لٹے ہم چادریں چھینی گئی. اب نہیں جینا گوارا اے میرے بابا حسین. اب نہیں جینا گوارا اے میرے بابا. باندھ کر رسی گلے میں کھینچتا ہے شمر جب. باندھ کر رسی گلے میں کھینچتا ہے شمر جب. میں نے امّوں کو پکارا اے میرے بابا حسین. میں نے امّوں کو پکارا اے میرے بابا حسین. ناتواں ہے بیڑیاں ہیں دیجئے آ کر ذرا. ناتواں ہے بیڑیاں ہیں دیجئے آ کر ذرا. بھائی عابد کو سہارا اے میرے بابا حسین. یوں سکینہ نے پکارا میرے بابا حسین زندہ میں مقید ہوئے جس دام حرم شاہ امبو خلائق ہوا دروازے پناہگاہ بلوا ہوا اس درجہ کے مزدود ہوئی راہ سر شرم سے زنجیر پا سر شرم سے زنجیر پا عابد نے رکھا تاوار کے شراب اسیروں کے بدن میں روتا تارے کازو روتا تارے کازو ہمیشہ زمان میں مشغول جو تھے کھیل میں اطفال وہ سارے کرتی تھی سکینہ حسرت کے نظارے کہتی تھی کہ کیا ہو گئے ہم جولی ہمارے بابا علی اصغر کو بابا علی اصغر کو کہاں لے کے صدا سب بچے یہاں کھیلتے میں خواندہ زنا ہے میں کھیلتی تھی جن سے میں کھیلتی تھی جن سے وہ اطفال کہاں ہے ناگہان نمودار ہوئی شام غریبا آیا غضب آلود وہاں شمر بدیما ایک ایک سے مخاطب ہوا وہ دشمن ایزا اب جاؤ کے ہوتا ہے اب جاؤ کے ہوتا ہے مخافل در زندہ گری آئینہ کبھی آل ابا کی کل دیکھیا پھر سے کل دیکھیا پھر سے اسیران بلا یہ سن کے پریشان ہوا امبو وہ سارا گم ہو گیا ایک شخص کا فرزند خدا را چلایا پدر اس کا رہا دل پنا یارا فرزند بھی بابا اسے فرزند بھی بابا اسے کہہ کے پکارا وہ طفل لپٹنے جو لگا اپنے پدر سے پیدا ہوئے کا سکینہ کے جگر سے پھر کے دم سر دیے کی بانوں سے گفتار اس بچے کو تو دیکھو کہ کیا خوش ہے دل افدار کیا نام پدر پیار سے لیتا ہے ہر ایک بار ایک ہم ہے کہ باپ کے ایک ہم ہے کہ ہے باپ کے فرقت میں گرفتار دل میں جو میرے درد ہے خالق پہ آیا ہے میں کس کو کہوں باپ میں کس کو کہوں باپ میرا باپ کہاں ارے بابا میرے ہوتے تو انہیں کہتی تھی بابا اب باپ کہاں جس کو کہوں باپ میں دکھیا یوں کوئی پدر بیٹی سے غافل نہیں ہوتا حیران ہوں بابا کے حیران ہو بابا کے اشواق ہوئے کیا آدھا نے ہمیں خیر کیا شام میں لا کے بابا میرے کیوں مجھ کو بابا میرے کیوں مجھ کو نہیں ڈھونڈتے آگ یہ کہہ کہ سکینہ پجو رخت اتاری بس ہائے پدر کہہ کے کئی بار پکاری تڑپی جو زمین پر تو زمین ہل گئی ساری جھنجلا کے کہا شمر نے جھنجلا کے کہا شمر نے پھر کرتی اوزاری اب خوب رلاؤں گا تجھے میں نہ ڈروں گا رہے تجھ کو اسیروں سے رہے تجھ کو اسیروں سے جدا قید کروں گا تیرے شمر نے بازوئے سکینہ کو جو پکڑا کنبے کی طرف اس نے عجب یاد سے دیکھا سب قیدیوں میں قیامت برپا سجاد کے قدموں پا سجاد کے قدموں پا مچل کر گری جھکے یوں لپٹی تھی بھائی سے وہ اس خوف و خطر میں ایک ہاتھ تو گردن میں تھا ایک ہاتھ تو گردن میں تھا ایک ہاتھ کمر میں منہ دیکھ کے سجاد کا کہتی تھی وہ ڈر کر اب آپ میرے رونے کے ضامن و برابر اگر تم سے چھٹی دی میری ہوئے گی کیوں کرے اب رو تو جو چاہے اب رو تو جو چاہے کرے شمر ستم بھیا مجھے تو شمر سے اس وقت بچا لے اب رو تو کر دیجئے اب رو تو کر دیجئے ظالم کے حوالے اب روئی میں روئی نہ روں گی زنہار اب رو اگر باپ کو اپنے تو گناہگار فرمائے کہ اب چھوڑے دے مجھے کوئی جفاکار بازو میرا دکھنے لگا بازو میرا دکھنے لگا اے عابد بے کس طرح جدا کنبے سے ہوئے گی سکینہ تم کہہ دو قسم کھا کے تم کہہ دو قسم کھا کے روئے گی سکینہ یہ کہتی تھی کھینچا جو ستم گر میں خزارہ کرتا پھٹا ہوا وہ پھٹا اور بھی سارا تب عابد بیمار نے رو کر یہ پکارا اے شمر بن باپ کے اے شمر بن باپ کے بیٹے خزارہ غافل تیری دہشت سے نہ ہوئے گی سکینہ اب ایسا ڈری ہے کہ اب ایسا ڈری ہے کہ نہ روئے گی سکینہ اب ایسا ڈری ہے کہ نہ روئے گی سکینہ
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. Before we begin, I would like to take this opportunity to again thank the community for inviting me back and allowing me a space to be able to discuss with you ideas and research. I hope that the series has been of some benefit and opened up your thinking about some of these most urgent discussions that we should be at the forefront of having. And if not, then I ask you to forgive me. And inshallah, we can find more series like this that open up the various topics that are urgent for us to be able to discuss. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Lady Sakina, please recite a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. Tonight is the third and final part of our mini-series thinking about the scoping of a bona fide fiqh al-bi'ah, a genuine chapter of climate and environmental law that would be befitting of the Shia school of thought, representing the Quran and holy Ahlul Bayt salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhim ajma'een. In our first discussion, we talked about why this is so imperative to us in the times in which we live in, and mentioned that our fuqaha, they have given space to be able to create new chapters of fiqh, to create new laws, and there is also the need to be able to include us in the creation of those laws. What we talked about as not only shura, but participatory law. In that, where a community understands better the obligations that are upon it and are willing to commit to those, the maraji' are in a position to be able to make laws accordingly. Because if we realize that we have certain duties and obligations, then it is easier for a marja' to be able to make law based on those people who are ready than to try to force people into something who are not ready and who would not be willing to commit to the same laws. Yesterday, we gave examples of what some of those burgeoning laws might include, how they might begin to be shaped in front of our eyes. And we gave two masail. The first one, for example, was if we argue that methane is the single biggest polluter in the world and contributor to global warming, and methane is primarily produced from our industrial levels of farming and meat industries, does it become obligatory upon us to reduce that industry, to bring it back within planetary boundaries? We found that even Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam had a hadith where they would prohibit the eating of meat if it was going to cause more harm than good. You recall yesterday we gave the example of the hadith from our fifth holy Imam Muhammad al-Baqir salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, where he was asked the question by the companion, and in another hadith by his own son, the sixth Imam alayhi salam, who asked him about the permissibility of eating domesticated donkey, al-humru al-ahliya. And the Imam said that at the time of the battle of Khaybar, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had temporarily prohibited the eating of domesticated donkey. Why? Because it was a means of transport for people to the battlefront, weapons to the battlefront. If you slaughtered the animals that were going to take you there to fight for Islam, and you couldn't reach the battlefront, then what would have happened to the Muslim Ummah? We would have been defeated. Muslims would have been destroyed. We would have had a smaller army, or an army that didn't have the required weapons to defend ourselves. So the Prophet could temporarily prohibit eating a certain type of meat. Why? Because there was a graver issue at stake. Forgive the pun. There was a graver issue at stake. You all like your steaks, yes? How do you like your steaks? Well done? Medium rare? You got the pun? Good. There was a graver issue at stake, meaning that we had to be able to preserve life, protect ourselves, and there was a bigger issue at play. So there was a temporary ban on something like this. Is it possible that such a thing could be developed in accordance with restricting the amount of meat that we could consume in order to be able to bring us back within planetary boundaries? Can you see how the faqih, the jurist, must look at these texts and see whether they can extrapolate from the examples at the time of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and then actually give us guidance according to the challenges that we have. This was one mas'ala that we took yesterday. A second mas'ala that we took yesterday was the issue of civil disobedience, isyan al-madani. Is it permissible for me to break the law if that activism is actually going to bring awareness to people about the level of consequence that is before us? We gave the example that we've always had activism to be able to break the law that allows us to be able to get a bigger point across. If you were present 60 years ago or 100 years ago at the forefront of the civil rights movements in this country, even the smallest bit of activism would have been breaking the law. Even for you to drink water from a certain fountain, it would have been prohibited for you. For you to sit on a certain part of the bus would have been prohibited for you. If a slave was a runaway and you didn't send them back to the plantation and you helped them escape, this would have been breaking law. But you would have been doing an act of civil disobedience, isyan al-madani. Who would have said at that time that this is haram for you to do? Well, the maraji' have a principle in place. Number one, that you have to be able to follow the laws of the land. Number two, there is qa'idatun nizam. You have to be able to keep society organized and not allow for chaos to enter into society. So he raised the mas'ala. Am I permitted to be able to engage in civil disobedience for a greater cause of protecting human life? And we looked at the answers of three of the Maraja al-Kiram from Najaf al-Ashraf. We looked at the opinions of Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Hussein al-Sistani, Dama Tawfiquhu. We looked at the opinion of Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Sabzawari, Dama Tawfiquhu. And we also took the opinion of Ayatollah Sayyid Murtada Shirazi, who was the representative of Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Sadiq al-Shirazi. So we took the opinions, and you could see each opinion differed, didn't they? All three opinions differed, and especially in the way in which they came to their conclusion about the same mas'ala. The point we make is not that you have to follow the mas'ala, that you can see how a burgeoning book of laws, of fiqh in this area is a very much needed issue, and how these masail, these contemporary topics, are actually very interesting as we begin to delve into them. Tonight, inshallah, we want to talk about maybe one or two more masail and think about that and then head towards a conclusion, inshallah. What are going to be the one or two masail that we discuss? Well, when I say one or two, they are very much interlinked, but they can be separated depending on how we approach it. But the second issue of this is definitely an independent mas'ala within itself. An ahkam shar'iyya that in and of itself is possibly one of the hardest issues for any marja to be able to tackle in accordance with the challenges of the time. I mentioned to you last night and on a previous night that we have what is now called climate law. You remember I mentioned this yesterday? I mentioned that the same way we now have an area of law and lawyers that deal with law in all sorts of areas, criminal law, tort law. There is also a burgeoning school of law which is called climate law, where lawyers can actually sue corporations and governments in order to demand responses to climate security. For example, right now in the US, there are more than 2,200 lawsuits against corporations and the government in order to demand climate justice from a legal perspective. Right now in this country, in the United States, more than 2,200 different cases. This is a burgeoning area of law. And so we mentioned that as this field develops, and as we start to see the idea of legal rulings, how do we compare and contrast those to Islamic rulings? One of the hardest rulings that we will have to be able to create and actually deal with, which we'll come to shortly, will be the issue of diya. What is diya? Compensation laws. In Islam, if I physically harm you, or even emotionally harm you, if I abuse you in any way, and I harm you physically, there is actually a compensation that I have to pay you. Now, from the perspective of climate law and international agreements, the idea of climate reparations and compensation for harm that is coming to people from abuse of the climate is actually a burgeoning space within the law today at the moment, internationally, and especially here in the United States. If now there is actually physical harm being done by us as individuals, or as a collective, or as a nation, and from the perspective of Western law, you could be charged and you could actually have to pay compensation for the things that you do. It raises a mas'ala, doesn't it, from the perspective of the Sharia. Can the Sharia also ask and demand and impose upon you and I the payment of compensation when we physically harm someone because we have broken the planetary boundaries that are upon us? If so, how do we calculate those things? Because all of the ahadith that talk about these things are based in a time in which the diya, the compensation, is actually rooted in a payment system of 1400 years ago. Back then, if you hurt someone, you'd have to pay with a camel. Literally. I'm going to talk to you about these ahadith. You literally have to pay someone with sheep. But from a potential climate reparations perspective today, you don't pay with sheep, you pay with dollars or euros. How much do you pay? What is the amount if I harm someone? And we mentioned yesterday that our actions have consequences. When we use gas guzzling cars or when we break planetary boundaries, we physically harm people. People physically die today, right now, as we speak, because of the choices that we make. In Islam, everything, if I harm someone, even the slightest amount, requires a diya. What would be the Islamic response to this question? Now, before we try to cover this a little bit, or at least introduce this, we have to go back to the issue of economy. Because what there is an overshoot point. There is an amount that can be harvested from this planet. And once we go past that amount, that is where we start to break planetary boundaries, and we start to cause harm to other human beings, to our ecology, and to other life, animal life as well. So tonight, inshallah, we're going to talk about two things. Number one, the idea of an economy that is not rooted in capitalism, but is rooted in ecological justice, what is termed today as a degrowth economy. Number one. Number two, if we start to go past that point, an overshoot point, where we begin to go past what we are physically allowed to use from this planet, and I start to be a cause of harm, physical harm to other human beings, what is the potential that in Sharia I actually have to pay a compensation to someone that I might directly or indirectly harm? Or a corporation has to pay. It might be that you own a business that is actually harming the planet, or you're working for a business that is harming the planet. Is it possible in Sharia that we have to pay a compensation for that? Number two. And then number three, what are the ayat that tell us that when we begin to make positive steps to bring ourselves back within planetary boundaries, that Allah promises the earth itself will respond back to us positively? This will be our topic tonight, inshallah, to be able to conclude our series with your blessings and aloud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Number one, a degrowth economy. What do we mean by degrowth? In capitalism, everything is measured by how much we can grow the economy. We normally measure economy through things like GDP, how much we can grow GDP, and how much we can grow the stock market. And we talk about, for example, how much growth there has been in this corporation and how much we have managed to grow the share of the market in this company or by this company. This is how capitalism is measured. And so it will use any available resource to be able to grow the company because it has a fiduciary duty. The principle of capitalism is that it doesn't matter what is destroyed, whether it's the planet or a human being or even someone's health. So long as we can make money, we have a fiduciary duty to be able to make money, and therefore we have to grow the company, we have to grow the stock market, we have to grow the economy. Opposed to this is called a degrowth economy, meaning that instead of growing the economy, we actually have to shrink the economy within planetary boundaries. If the planet only has a certain amount of resource available, the economy cannot use more than that resource. It's a really simple and obvious assumption in modern day economics. Degrowth economy. Let's say we have a fishery stock. Let's say we have a certain amount of woodland and forests. There is only a certain amount of that resource that I can utilize. If I fish 100% of those fishery stocks, then there's no chance for those fish to rebreed, to repopulate, is there? So now I destroy the entirety of that fishery stock, and tomorrow our children cannot use those fish, cannot fish those stocks, and so do not have access to it. Does that make sense? Did you know, according to the United Nations, at current rate, the way in which we are fishing and overusing the stocks of fish around the world, by 2050, we will have run out of fishery stocks in the seas. You understand? So in capitalism, you can use whatever you want because we have to make money. Whereas in degrowth, there is a certain limit and you have to be able to reduce the economy back within that limit. Therefore, me and you, our spending can only be within the boundaries of what the planet allows. Now, there are 9 planetary boundaries. For example, there's only so much in the oceans that we can use. That's one planetary boundary. There's only so much we can emit into the atmosphere before it starts to go past the fail-safe. There are 9 of these different planetary boundaries. We are currently breaking 6 of those planetary boundaries. And not only are we breaking them, in the majority of those 6, we've actually gone more than double the allowed usage. Have you guys heard of something called World Overshoot Day? Have you ever heard of this? You've heard of it? What is World Overshoot Day? The term means that there is a day in our calendar that's when we as a human collective have reached 100% the maximum amount that we can use from our natural resources. Anything past that date, it is called overshoot. We are now going into borrowed time. We are now using next year's stock and the following year's stock. You understand? Anyone know what is that date? World overshoot date. 2nd of August. So for everything we use, everything you buy, everything you consume, from the point of the 3rd of August onwards, is actually more than what the planet can hold. And what you're doing, and I am doing, is using from next year's stocks and following year, which means that eventually it will run out quicker than should be running out. That could be anything. It could be the forests, it could be the soil, it can be the fishery stocks, whatever it may be. The gas, the oil, everything we are using at a greater pace than is actually available to us. Therefore, degrowth economics demands that all economies bring themselves within planetary boundaries, and therefore we as consumers also have to bring ourselves back within planetary boundaries. Otherwise, from the 3rd of August every year, we are currently doing harm to the planet, to the next generation. Everybody understand? Okay. Who told us that we should stay within the boundaries of the planet? Who do you think? Would it surprise you if Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam talked about this? Would it surprise you? No, it wouldn't surprise you. Hadith comes to us from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, who talks to us about the importance of balance within the economy. The economy, there is only a certain amount that we are permitted to use. We should not be going beyond that, or what we called overshoot. I mentioned to you 1 or 2 ahadith, and if anyone wants any of these, you can ask me, I'll happily send them to you. In Tafsir Majma' al-Bayan by At-Tabrasi, Imam Ali alayhi salam is narrated to have said the following about israf. Sometimes we in the Indo-Pak continent, we say asraf. In Arabic, israf. What is asraf? Waste. It is beyond what you actually need. So if I have one plate of food and I only need one, that's sufficient for me. But if I take 2 plates, I eat one and I leave the second one and I throw it in the bin, that second plate is asraf. We all know that. You've seen many times people go to ziyarah, subhanallah. They go on ziyarah, mashallah, very nice hotel, buffet, take plate after plate after plate of food. You'll see this with your own eyes. And they just leave half of that food to be thrown away. Subhanallah. Then they say, Ya Ali, next to the darih of Imam Ali alayhi salam, a hotel that is overlooking the haram of Imam Ali alayhi salam, all this asraf to be thrown in the bin. Subhanallah, Shia, huh? Embarrassing. Imam Ali alayhi salam talks about asraf in the economy. Listen to this hadith, Tafsir Majmu' al-Bayan. Imam Ali alayhi salam said, beware of asraf in money and expenditure, and it is upon you to be cautious. For never will a people be reduced to poverty if they are prudent in their spending. Be very cautious of israf, of wasting something beyond what is your need. There is only a certain amount that you require, and if you go beyond that, he says the consequences of that in this world, forget the hereafter and Allah holding us to account, that will come. A person will never go poor. Because if you have a certain income and you use beyond your income, you're spending waste, it's not yours, it doesn't belong to you, you will fall into poverty. Imam says, be very wary of this practice. In another hadith, Imam alayhi salam links israf with greed, more than you require. Hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, mentions at-tama', greed, awwal ash-shar. Greed is the first evil. All the evils that are to follow is off the back of greed, demanding more than what you actually require. In another hadith he says, at-tama' faqr al-zahir. Greed is actually an apparent poverty. Because you don't realize that you're taking more than you need, it's going to put you into deficit. You don't realize it's actually going to lead you towards faqr, towards poverty. Again, in another hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, he writes to Malik al-Ashtar, you know, in the famous letter to Malik al-Ashtar about how to govern. Did you know that in that letter, Imam actually talks about the cultivation of the land, the policies that he wants Malik al-Ashtar to follow? You've all heard this letter, right? Very famous letter number 31 from Nahj al-Balagha. He says about the land, how much you can use. Partake of it gladly, so long as you are a benefactor to the land, not a spoiler of the land. You are a cultivator of the land, not a destroyer of the land. You see, you can only utilize the land, this earth, within certain boundaries. The moment you now start to become a destroyer of the planet, harm to the planet, this becomes haram upon me and you to be able to do. So think about this very carefully, about how much we use, how much we actually put back. There's types of economies that are actually economies that help us to be able to put back within, when we replant, when we regrow. And if we don't do this, then actually we are taking from what does not really belong to us. It's urgent that we get back within planetary boundaries. So now, we stated that there are consequences that go beyond this. Once we go beyond the overshoot point, we're actually harming the planet, we're harming human life, we're harming animal life, and we're actually putting into potential harm of our own children and grandchildren. That they won't even have access to the things that we currently have access to. We are able to utilize forests, rainforests. They won't have them because it takes you a long time to be able to replant these things. If you overuse it, it takes decades to plant these things. If we destroy the fishery stocks, it takes decades to be able to replenish these things. So when we utilize them, our grandchildren will not have them available to us. In addition, when we begin to utilize more in emissions, as I said yesterday, we're actually harming people and harming the planet. Let me give you some statistics as just a small way of example for you and I to be able to appreciate the physical harm that takes place in accordance with what we are doing. In Europe, last year in 2022, there was a scientific paper that was put out. Forget what I mentioned yesterday, like dust or breathing problems that comes from these emissions. That's other things. Just heat stroke in Europe due to the warming of the planet. How many people in Europe, just Europe, last year, 2022, died because of heat? According to one scientific study, 61,672 people died of heat-related causes in Europe last summer. 61,000 died, were killed off by our behaviors. This summer was even hotter. It's actually the record summer since history's been written. Think about that very carefully. If 61,000 people die in Europe, who's responsible? Is it the governments? Partially. Is it corporations? Partially. Is it me and you? Partially. From the Islamic perspective, if I even scratch you, both purposefully and by accident, in the ahadith, there is a diya to be paid. Amdan, purposefully, or khata'an, by mistake. There's actually a compensation that is to be paid. Forget killing people. Scratch you. I'll explain this more in a minute. You know, I think it was last month, I think it was in July, there was a heat wave in the United States, particularly on the East Coast. Do you remember that in Arizona and things like that? You remember last month there was a heat wave that took place in Arizona? Yes? People actually went out and took pictures in front of that. You remember there was this thing, it's the hottest it's ever been in the country, and people went and actually took pictures with it. Did you see that? Do you remember that? Last month, 85 people in Arizona suffered severe burns just from having contact with the pavement. Sayyid will tell you in Iraq, there's actually a funny joke that during the summer, it gets so hot that people actually crack an egg on the pavement and boil an egg on the pavement. Sahamla. It's true, right? So in certain parts of Iraq, it gets so hot, 50 degrees C. I don't know what the Fahrenheit is because I deal with centigrade. It gets so hot, 50 degrees C, you can crack an egg on the pavement and make yourself a nice scrambled egg. 85 people in Arizona last month suffered severe burns just from contact with the pavement, heated to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 82 degrees C. 50 degrees, they're cooking an omelette. 82 degrees C in Arizona was how hot the pavement was. 7 of them died in Arizona last month because of just touching the pavement. That's how hot it was. touching the pavement was so hot, 7 people died from it. In total, 257 people had underlying causes of death listed by coroners as, quote, exposure to excessive natural heat. Excessive natural heat. It's in front of us. It's happening right now. People are dying from this. Now, I don't need to tell you as well, last year about the floods that happened in Pakistan. How many of you remember the devastating floods that happened last year in Pakistan? In some areas, 15 inches of rain fell in a single day, displacing nearly 8 million people from their homes. Until now, they're still trying to recover, many of them. So we can't say that this is not happening in front of our eyes, or we can't say that people are not being affected by it. The question actually that is posed by the international community and by people who are activists for climate justice is when people are so badly harmed at the level of international law, is there such a thing as climate reparations? Meaning, industrialized countries that are actually polluters, more heavily polluters than others, like the United States, like Britain, like China, should they have to pay other countries to help fix what they have broken? Think about that. In Pakistan, there is this figure that in order to be able to fix what was broken last year from those floods, it would cost $16 billion US, just from those few days of floods. And you know, annually there are these floods because of how terrible at the moment the weather is. Who pays for that 16 billion? Who actually creates a system whereby if there is heavy rains, they can make sure the water goes off the land and does not accumulate and drown people or destroy the land? That requires money to be able to invest. Who should pay for that? Should Pakistan pay for it? Or should those countries that have gone overshoot, that are the causes of climate change and global warming, should they have to pay? Who pays? Well, last year in COP27 in Egypt, for the first time, there was an international agreement that those countries that are the major polluters, they should have to pay climate reparations. But of course, you won't be surprised to hear if I told you that even though they've agreed to this, the United States of America has done everything they can to be able to avoid paying those. You can search it for yourself. Number one. Number two, corporations are now being sued. I'll give you an example of how much they're being sued for the amount that they are destroying. This is very interesting. This is reported on the 19th of May this year, 2023. And I'm reading to you from the Guardian newspaper in the UK. The world's top fossil fuel companies owe annual reparations of $209 billion US to compensate communities for the damages that they have done by the pollutions that they have done and the decades of lies that they have told, according to latest studies. BP, Shell, ExxonMobil, Total, Saudi Arabia's state oil company, and Chevron are amongst the largest polluters, which have created droughts, wildfires, sea level rise, melting glaciers, and other catastrophes between now and 2050. A groundbreaking analysis has calculated that there is currently reparations owed at $209 billion US from those companies. What's funny is, I don't know if you know this, but now actually here in the United States of America, there was a landmark ruling this month on the 14th of August. In Montana, 50 youth from the ages of 5 years old to 22 years old sued the state, arguing that we have a right to health, which includes our environment being protected from pollutants. And if the state does not give us this, then we have the right to be able to sue the state. And they won. It's a landmark case, opening the door for a person to be able to sue the state if they do not provide you with a clean environment. Interesting, isn't it, what's happening in the world outside of us? Now, so nations can be sued, corporations can be sued, states can be sued. Think about this. In the eyes of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, if I am using a gas guzzler and I am participating in an overshoot, or I am doing asraf and I am purchasing more than what is required or what is allowed from what I should be purchasing, and I am causing physical harm to someone else, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, am I owing reparations? Am I owing compensation to another person that I harm? What do you think? What do you think the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhi wassalam will say? The answer is yes. I'll read to you some ahadith so that you can appreciate. Hadith comes to us from our fifth Imam, Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Listen to this hadith, it's so interesting. Remember yesterday I talked to you about how flexible the fiqh is. Yeah, it can make something haram, make something halal in accordance with the need. Yeah, listen to this hadith about diya. From Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. وَضَعَ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ دِيَةُ الْعَيْنِ وَدِيَةُ النَّفْسِ وَحَرَّمَ النَّبِيذ وَكُلَّ مُسْكِرٍ. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam says in a hadith, the Prophet stipulated diya, compensation, diyatul ayn, for even the harming of the eye. If I poke you in the eye, there is a compensation. وَضَعَ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ دِيَةُ الْعَيْنِ وَدِيَةُ النَّفْسِ. And even the diya of life, your soul. If your body is killed, there is diya even for this. وَحَرَّمَ النَّبِيذ وَكُلَّ مُسْكِرٍ. And he prohibited alcoholic beverages. He prohibited intoxicants from grapes and any type of wine. Now listen to this response. The companion says, فَقَالَ لَهُ رَجُلٌ. Person said to Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, فَوَضَعَ هَذَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ مِنْ غَيْرِ أَنْ يَكُونَ جَاءَ فِيهِ شَيْءٍ. The Prophet stipulated these amounts of diya, compensation, even though no revelation came about this. Allah didn't reveal these things in the Quran, but the Prophet stipulated how much is diya if you hurt someone's eye. Listen to the response by Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. Na'am, لِيَعْلَمَ مَنْ يَطَعَ الرَّسُولِ وَمَنْ يُعْصِيهِ. He did this in order to know who was going to obey the Prophet and who was going to disobey the Prophet. Think about that very carefully. Listen to the hadith. He put in compensation because he wanted to know who would actually obey the laws that he made. If you harm someone, there is a compensation. The Messenger of Allah wants to know whether you're willing to pay that compensation or not. Poke someone's eye by accident, there's a diya upon you. He implemented this law, لِيَعْلَمَ, in order to know who is actually going to bother paying these things and who is not going to pay these things. Incredible, isn't it? You see how flexible the law was. Forget justice. The Prophet wanted to identify who is going to listen to me and who is not. Because if I know that you're actually going to listen to me in something as little as a scratch on someone, then I know you will listen to me in the biggest of issues. If I tell you Ali ibn Abi Talib is my Khalifa, but I know that you've listened to me in the tiniest issue, I know you will obey me when it comes to the appointment of someone like Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. So the Prophet even stipulated laws down to this level in order for us to see whether we would obey these laws or not. One last hadith about diya, very interesting. Again, to show you the flexibility and how things evolve within the fiqh. Someone can say, yeah, diya, time of the Prophet, compensation. How am I supposed to figure out how much compensation is there if I harm someone? Allah will take me to account the day. He'll tell me to pay up with my thawab. No. Actually, inside the ahadith, there is so much flexibility for marja to be able to stipulate what this actually is. Listen to this hadith. Hadith comes to us from our fifth Imam, Abi Jaffer al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. I'm reading to you from Wasa'il al-Shi'a by the great scholar Al-Hurr al-Amiri, one of our most important books of ahadith. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, one of the companions by the name of Al-Hakam ibn Utayba, says to Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, قلت له إن الديات إنما كانت تؤخذ قبل اليوم من الإبل والبقر والغنم. Compensation laws, it was taken from people before today. Before the laws that are implemented today, people used to have to pay the compensation laws from ibil, camel, baqar, cow, wal ghanam, sheep. قال عليه السلام, Imam al-Baqir responds, إنما كان ذلك في البوادي قبل الإسلام. Yes, that's right. This law of you paying compensation by camels and by cows and by sheep was for the bawadi قبل الإسلام. Bawadi, Bedouins, before Islam. فلما ظهر الإسلام وكثرت الورق في الناس قسمها أمير المؤمنين على الورق. Then when Islam came and people switched their economies to money, monetary values, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen divided the compensation into either being paid for by animals or being paid for by money. قال الحكم, the companion responds, أرأيت من كان اليوم من أهل البوادي ما الذي يؤخذ منهم في الدية اليوم إبل أو ورق. Today, the Bawadi, the Bedouin are still present. So if you have a charge, this is Imam al-Baqir's time, if you now have compensation for Bedouin, before Islam, they were used to paying it a certain way with animals, but then Islam came and they had to pay it through monetary ways. Which one would they have to pay it today, Ya Ibn Rasulullah? Do they pay this way or they pay this way? ما الذي يؤخذ منهم? How would you take it from them? الدية اليوم إبل أو ورق, animals or financial with money. فقال الإبل اليوم مثل الورق. Today, for them, paying with animals is similar to them paying through finances. بل هي أفضل من الورق في الدية. In fact, it's even better for you to pay in these ways. The point I make is, can you see how in Islam there was evolution? It wasn't stagnant. The ways in which people used to have to pay, the amounts that people used to have to pay were shifting, and in accordance with the people, in accordance with the time, in accordance with the types of crimes that might be committed. And as a result, even until today, we have to try to think about the ways in which diyat would be paid out. This is a big bahath that takes place in the Bahth al-Kharij. Now, I can't tell you how much diya would be paid. The point I make to you is, can you see that there are real world masail that are unfolding in front of our eyes? The United States of America is being asked to pay countries like Pakistan for the amount of damage that it has wrought upon them. States, corporations are being sued because they have duties towards people and towards the planet. Think about this very carefully now, between me and Allah. If I am using a type of car, or I am buying and purchasing and consuming at a far greater level than what is my right, my haqq, outside of planetary boundaries, do you imagine between me and Allah there is nothing? Or do you imagine if I harm someone on the other side of the planet or on this side of the planet, do you not imagine that there will be a compensation for that person? In the eyes of Allah, there would be. It becomes incumbent upon us to know what that thing would be, for our Maraji al-Kiram to be able to extrapolate that in the times in which we live in. These are examples of real life masail that would be upon us, that come to us from the Quran and Ahlul Bayt, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhim ajma'in. The last thing I want to mention in this series is that we can actually make a huge difference. And if you see that actually the specialists, the mutakhassiseen in this area, said to us, there are things that we can do in order to be able to make change. For example, 8 things that we should do, or the world needs to do, to avoid the worst of climate disaster in order: stop methane emissions, stop deforestation, restore the degradation from the soil back to being proper soil, change what we eat, turn to renewable energies, use our energy more efficiently, stop burning fossil fuels. Act now. These are 8 things that we can do that would actually have real life impact on our planetary system. The Quran has several verses where it tells us that when a person intends good, or believes in good, or does good, the planet itself responds with good back to us. And also there are many other verses that tell us the opposite, that my very niyyah of harm to the planet, or my very act of harm to the earth itself, the earth responds by harming me, human beings, back badly. Did you know that? Very interesting. We think of the earth as being maybe just a rock. Is that actually what it is? No. Allah has created everything with conscience and awareness. Everything glorifies Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يُسَبِّحُ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Everything, including the earth, it is conscious, it's aware of our behaviors, and it responds in this way. I was sitting in the Dars, Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Mudarrisi, the Marja of Karbala, and this was about 4 years ago or something. This was before pandemic, 2018, 2019. And there was a series of natural events and disasters that hit the United States of America. I don't know if you recall it, but it was something like in Texas, it was the worst tornado for 50 years. And then in Oklahoma, the worst tornado for 50 years. It was like this. It was like 3 or 4 events, one after the other, that were categorized as the worst for 50 years, 50 years, 50 years, something like that. And he actually mentioned in his dars, he said, imagine the person that sees this and is blinded by it, doesn't even pay attention. He said, Allahu A'lam, I don't know. But do you not think that the earth is telling you something? If the earth is heating up in front of you and you constantly have all of these, the worst events in history or in recorded events, California wildfires, or in Vancouver, or in, in Greece, everywhere in the earth in the last 1, 2, 3, 5 years, there have been record levels of heat, record levels of damage. Only a person who is blind would not put the dots together. He said, Allahu A'lam, I can't tell you for sure this is the earth responding to you. But based on the Quran, it is telling you something. So I want to mention to you 2 or 3 ayat of the Quran that demonstrate that when you do good to the planet will respond back to you with good. And if you do evil to the planet will respond back to you with evil. Please open your Qur'ans to chapter number 19, Surah Maryam. Verse number 88 to 90. Chapter number 19, Surah Maryam, verses 88 to 90. In this sequence of verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives an example that even your beliefs, forget actions, just your beliefs and my beliefs, the earth responds to them. The earth is aware of even my aqa'id, my belief. Have a look at these verses. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَقَالُوا اتَّخَذَ الرَّحْمَنُ وَلَدًا. And they say, Ar-Rahman, Allah, has taken a son. Who is this? The Christians. لَقَدْ جِئْتُمْ شَيْئًا إِدًّا. You have made an abominable assertion about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To say that God has a son is an abominable thing to say. Look at this, verse number 90. تكاد السماوات يتفطرن منه وتنشق الأرض وتخر الجبال هدا. The heavens, the skies may almost rent asunder and the earth cleave apart and the mountains fall down in their places. Just the belief that God has taken a son, the earth may cleave asunder and the mountains fall down. The earth is aware and responds. Can you imagine if we do physical harm to the earth or injustice to the planet, how the earth responds as well? But on the other side, there's many, many verses that tell us that if I do good, Allah will shower us with abundance from the earth itself. Open your Qur'ans to chapter number 72 or 71 as well. Chapter number 71, Surah Nuh, verse 10, 11, 12. Chapter 71, Surah Nuh, verse 10, 11, and 12. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فقلت استغفروا ربكم إنه كان غفارا. I, Nuh alayhi salam, said, ask forgiveness from your Lord. He is ever forgiving. You see, if you've done wrong, ask forgiveness. Change your behavior. How will Allah respond if you ask forgiveness for what you have done and changed your behavior? Verse number 11. يرسل السماء عليكم مدرارا ويمددكم بأموال وبنين ويجعل لكم جنات ويجعل لكم أنهارا. He will send down upon you rain, and He will help you with wealth and sons and make gardens for you and make rivers for you. The earth will become beautiful for you. You will gain wealth from it. Your economy will improve, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. This is a promise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you do good to the world will do good to you. This is a response from the earth itself. Last ayah, chapter number 7, Surah Al-A'raf. Verse number 96. Chapter number 7, Surah Al-A'raf, verse number 96. Allah promises that if we do good, Allah will make the earth give us blessings in abundance. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَلَوْ أَنَّ أَهْلَ الْقُرَىٰ آمَنُوا وَاتَّقَوْا If the people of the towns had just believed and done taqwa, guarded against evil, لَفَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ بَرَكَاتٍ مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ. We would certainly have opened up for them barakat, blessings from the sky and from the earth. Allah says, you just do good to the earth will do good back to you. It's not a difficult thing to understand. If we overshoot, the earth will respond back to us. If we're killing off species, harming the planet, the earth will respond to us. And believe me, you will not win a fight with Mother Nature. You know who figured that out? The people of Ad and Thamud. Do you remember the story of Ad and Thamud? The people of Ad, they used to build houses several stories high. They said, nothing will destroy us. We have the best technology in the world of that time. Several story houses. Nothing like that in the world. التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد. Allah says in the Quran. What did Allah do to them? He gave them an earthquake that dropped them to the ground. That was Ad. You know what Thamud did, right? Thamud said, well, we won't build several story towers. We will hew out houses from the mountains. Have you ever seen in Jordan, in Petra, have you seen how they used to hew out houses inside the mountains? They used to say, well, the people of Ad, the reason why they were destroyed is because they made tall buildings. We won't make this mistake. God is not stronger than the mountains. He can't destroy mountains. So we will dig into the mountains and make houses inside the mountains. What did Allah do to them? He sent winds gushing over them and covered them with sandstorms. You will not win the battle against Mother Nature. This is a precedent within the Quran. But, if we actually do good to the planet, Allah promises in the Quran, the planet will respond in goodness back to us. My brothers and sisters, this series has been for the purpose of opening our minds, enlightening us towards this most urgent crisis that is ahead of us. And it requires not just individual action at the level of our governments, actions at the level of our corporations, but also our communities have to respond. As I said to you on the previous night, we are supposed to be shuhada ala nas, witness to mankind. Mankind is supposed to look at us, Muslims, and say, this is how I'm supposed to behave. Not the other way around. I'm not supposed to look to climate activists and say, oh, that's how I'm supposed to behave. Or because Al Gore has actually put out so much work, now I have to change my behavior. We were the ones that were supposed to lead humankind in these behaviors. And unless and until we actually do so, we will never be able to make a change to this planet. The first duty is upon us to be able to make change. Inshallah, we can do that within our Husseyniyat, within our family units, and within our own selves. Inshallah, this little series inspires me and you to be able to do that which is demanded from us. Tell me something. Yazid, la'natullahi alayh, how did he die? Does anyone know? He died on a hunting accident. Have you come across this? He went out hunting, and he died in a hunting accident. Even nature was against Yazid. Even the animals were against Yazid. If you butcher the grandson of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do you think that creation itself will not come after you? Of course it will. This is what Allah is promising us within the Quran. That you do good to creation, creation will do good to you. You do evil to creation, creation will do evil back to you. Imagine this man, hitting the head of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam with a stick and mocking him, saying, "Oh Hussein, what excellent teeth you had." Imagine Sayyidah Ruqayya alayha salam having to watch this atrocity in front of her. One of the companions actually stood up in the court of Yazid and said, "Oh Yazid, stop what you are doing, for I have seen Rasulullah kiss those lips. Stop what you are doing." That head was placed on a platter, and it is said that it was given to Bibi Sakina inside the dungeons of Shah. Yazid is lying comfortably within his palace in his bed, and from the dungeons, only a few meters away, there is crying and there is screaming coming from inside. Do you know why? Sayyidah Sakina had actually woken up from a dream that hurt her and terrorized her so much that she could not stop lamenting and crying for her father, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. The cries are said to have woken Yazid up, and he asked, "What is happening inside this prison?" And they said, "The daughter of Imam al-Hussein, she is inconsolable. She just wants her father." It is said within the books of Maqtal that she had actually seen her grandmother in a dream. The narration says that she sees in front of her 4 anwar, 4 lights, which were the manifestation of the great ladies of Jannah. She sees Lady Maryam, she sees Lady Asiya, she sees Lady Khadija, and then she sees her grandmother Fatima al-Zahra in her dream. Do you know what the hadith says? It mentions that Fatima al-Zahra has in her hands a shirt that is stained with blood, ripped from the amount of arrows and swords that have hit it. And she says, "Oh my granddaughter Sakina, this is the shirt of your father Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. I will present this on the day of judgment, and I will seek vengeance for what has occurred to Abu Abdullah al-Hussein." When she saw this dream and she awoke, she was so startled at what she had seen, she was crying inconsolably, "Father, I wish you were here with me. Father, how do I tell you about what they did to Sajjad? Father, how do I tell you about what they did to Zainab bin Kulthum?" You can imagine Sakina wanting to cry to her father about the lashes upon her back. With those cries and with those screams and with those tears, none of the family could stop her. They too are crying in desperation. Yazid says, if she wants her father, then give her the head. We are told by the Dhakirin that he places the head of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein upon a plate and then places a covering on it. They knock at the door, they open the door, and the servants of Yazid say, "This is from Yazid to the little girl. Tell her to stop crying." She takes this plate, she takes off the covering, and she sees the head of her father. Can you imagine this 4-year-old girl taking the head of Imam al-Hussein into the corner of this dungeon and crying and complaining to this head? "Oh my father, they struck me. Oh my father, they threw boiling water at me. Oh my father, they tried to sell me off as a slave." And after all of these complaints, her energy leaves and eventually she becomes quiet. We are told that after she becomes quiet, Lady Zainab comes to be able to take her and put her to sleep. Then she looks towards Sajjad and says, "Oh Imam Sajjad, I do not find any movement in Ruqayya. I do not find any movement in this young small child. You can imagine Sajjad coming over. This is his younger sister. You can imagine him touching her body, and there is no more movement in that body. Can you imagine the cries that are coming from this prison? I want you to imagine how they must have given ghusl and kafan to this child. We are told in the books of Maqtal that she had been lashed so much that when Imam Sajjad alayhi salam tries to give her ghusl and kafan, when the ladies try to give her ghusl and kafan, that they cannot even separate her clothes from her body because of the amount of wounds on her body, that her clothes had become stuck to her. But I want you to imagine that as they are allowed to depart from the dungeons, I want you to imagine Sayyidah Zainab gathers this qafila. They are about to return to Karbala in order to bury the heads. I want you to imagine she is about to depart, but as she is counting everyone, there must have been one person who was sitting inside that dungeon saying, I do not want to leave. In Karbala there is Ali Asghar, my son has been taken from me. In Damascus my daughter Sakina has been taken from me. What do I have to go back to Medina for? Leave me here, Zainab. I only want to stay with my daughter Sakina. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we're to pass away from this world before his coming, Ya Allah, grant us the opportunity to be raised from our graves so that we can fight in the way of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask for Ya Allah, whatever our hajat are, Ya Allah, accept them bihaqqi Sayyidina Ruqayya alayhi salam. We ask for Ya Allah, grant us a ziyarah fi dunya wal akhirah. And Ya Allah, in light of this series, whatever we can do to be able to restore balance and justice to this planet, help us to be able to do so, inshaAllah. Matim Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein.
क्या शान है क्या दबदबा क्या लोग हैं कुरानुमा सल्ले अला आयात का है काफिला मशको अलम इनका निशान अब्बास मीर कारवां 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 अब्बास मीर कारवां 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 अब्बास मीर कोई शबी है मुस्तफा कोई हसन बाल रबा है कोई आपसे सैयदा शब्बीर का ये काफिला फिर भी अलम का सिमा अब्बास मीर कारवां 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 Hussein. Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein.
Ya Hussein. Hello.
حسین تیرے لہو کی خوشبو حسین تیرے لہو کی خوشبو فلک کے دامن سے آ رہی ہے حسین تیرے لہو کی خوشبو حسین تیرے لہو کی خوشبو فلک کے دامن سے آ رہی ہے فلک کے دامن سے آ رہی ہے یہ خون ناحق چھپے گا کیوں کر یہ خون ناحق چھپے گا کیوں کر جسے یہ دنیا چھپا رہی ہے حسین تیرے لہو کی خوشبو حسین تیرے لہو کی خوشبو فلک کے دامن سے آ رہی ہے فلک کے دامن سے آ رہی ہے حسین لاشا جواں کا لے کر حسین لاشا جواں کا لے کر چلے ہیں مقتل سے سوئے خیمہ چلے ہیں مقتل سے سوئے خیمہ مگر ضعیفی قدم قدم پر مگر ضعیفی قدم قدم پر اٹھا رہی ہے بٹھا رہی ہے حسین تیرے لہو کی خوشبو حسین تیرے لہو کی خوشبو فلک کے دامن سے آ رہی ہے فلک کے دامن
یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین ابھی آتی ہے سکینہ کی صدائیں لوگوں ہائے زندانوں سے ابھی آتی ہے سکینہ کی صدائیں لوگوں ہائے زندانوں سے ابھی آتی ہے سکینہ کی صدائیں لوگوں ہائے زندہ میرے بابا کو ملا دو میں دعائیں دوں گی سسکیاں لے کے جو کہتی تھی مسلمانوں سے اب بھی آتی ہے سکینہ کی صدائیں لوگوں بولے سجاد سکینہ یہ مقدر تیرا بول سجاد سکینہ یہ مقدر تیرا بے وطن تجھے کو لیے پھرتا ہوں بازاروں میں اور لہو آج بھی جاری ہے تیرے کانوں سے اب بھی آتی ہے سکینہ کی صدائیں لوگوں اب بھی آتی ہے سکینہ کی صدائیں لوگوں جا کے مقتل میں پکاری یہ سکینہ رو کر جا کے مقتل میں پکاری یہ سکینہ رو کر بھیا کاسے میرے اکبر تم کہاں ہو سارے میرے بابا کو بچا لو آ کے شیطانوں سے اب بھی آتی ہے سکینہ کی صدائیں لوگوں ہائے زندانوں سے اب بھی آتی ہے سکینہ کی صدائیں لوگوں ہائے زندانوں سے لب دریا سے علمدار کی آئی یہ صدا، لب دریا سے علمدار کی آئی یہ صدا، اے سکینہ تجھ سے شرمندہ ہے چاچا تیرا، پانی پہنچا نہ سکا ہے کٹے شانوں سے، اب بھی آتی ہے سکینہ کی صدائیں لوگوں، 8 اذان بیک وقت فضا میں گونجی، 8 اذان بیک وقت فضا میں گونجی، ثانیہ زہرا کے قطبوں کو دبانے کے لیے شور برپا کیا دربار میں اذانوں سے، اب بھی آتی ہے سکینہ کی صدائیں، یا حسین
یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین، جب مجھے یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا، ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے، ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے پکارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے بابا، جب مجھے آپ
کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا،
مجھے بالوں سے پکڑ کر ہیں تماچے مارے، مجھے بالوں سے پکڑ کر ہیں تماچے مارے، میں نے سر شرم سے مانگا جو تمہارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ
کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا،
ساتھ رہواروں کے دوڑایا گیا ہے مجھ کو، ساتھ رہواروں کے دوڑایا گیا ہے مجھ کو، چور زخموں سے میں
تیرا ہے
سارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے
ہمارا بابا،
جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا، ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے، ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے پکارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا، جب مجھے آپ کے
قاتل نے
ہمارا بابا. مجھے بالوں سے پکڑ کر ہے تماچے مارے, مجھے بالوں سے پکڑ کر ہے تماچے مارے. میں نے سر شمر سے مانگا جو تمہارا بابا, جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا, جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا, جب مجھے آپ وہ جو در آپ نے تحفے میں مجھے بخشے تھے, وہ جو در آپ نے تحفے میں مجھے بخشے تھے, ان کو بے دردی سے ظالم نے اتارا بابا, جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا, جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا. ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے, ہر تماچے پہ سکینہ نے پکارا بابا, جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا, جب مجھے آپ آخری مصرع ہمارا بابا. ساتھ رہواروں کے دوڑایا گیا ہے مجھ کو, ساتھ رہواروں کے دوڑایا گیا ہے مجھ کو, چور زخموں سے بدن میرا ہے سارا بابا, جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے پکارا بابا.
محمد والے محمد بلند تر صلوات. اللہم صلی علی محمد.
We request you to please recite the Surah Al-Fatiha for Dr. Maksud Hussain, Dr. son of Mahmoud Hussain, Jaffer Shamim, Dr. Sayyid Jaffer, Ali Akhtar Mahdi, and all Mahmoudin of Hafid Khan.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله, السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين, السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين, السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى, السلام عليك يا إمام حسن المجتبى, السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين, وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك, وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذريتك, علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا حجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان, سيدي الأمان من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن, السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان, السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان, سيدي متى ترانا ونراك, عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهور الأمر. السلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم
وليك حجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليهم وعلى آبائهم في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا زكاتها وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.